Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Karen Kossie-Chernyshev, fifth-generation Texan and professor of history at Texas Southern University. How are you doing today?
I am doing wonderfully well. Doing well.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you. I know it is the summer, and we both have classes, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I'll get started with the questions. How did you get into Black studies, and what keeps you committed to doing that work? And especially you can speak to Black Texas studies, because that's your specialty. Or one of them.
Yes, I can actually trace it back. We can go way back to the encyclopedias of Africa, the Encyclopedia of African American History that my mom and dad bought. I remember there were 3 volumes, and the books were brown and the like brown leather, and there was gold lettering on the side. And I remember at first reading those, and then I have to thank my eldest sister for ordering a copy of Ebony Jr. So we had Ebony Jr., we had Jet Magazine, we had Ebony Magazine, and so that was my introduction to attention to Black life, right? And I was always, because I was in a predominantly African American district, it didn't start out that way. It was at first it was predominantly white, but after integration, that entire area became predominantly African American. So I remember I were always celebrating Black history. So we would, investigate a name. And I remember in high school writing a poem about, that I knew was based on African American history. So there was always this attention to it in a kind of personal way. At home, it was just there, right? But I didn't think of majoring in Black studies. I kind of saw my interest in Black people as just part of my personal everyday life, right? And so when I was preparing to go to college at Rice University, I wasn't so much thinking about Black studies as a discipline. I was just this Black woman who would take advantage of opportunities to learn Black history for my own kind of personal benefit, right? So I wasn't thinking about it as something that I would actually study. So I was actually a French English major. French mostly. English I decided to do because it was practical. I remember talking to one of the maids on campus whom I see in the morning. She asked me, she said, "So what's your major?" And I said, "French." And she said, "What you gonna do with that?" I said, "I'm gonna work for the UN." I had these big dreams of working for the United Nations because I had run into a book on the bookshelf. I can't even remember how I decided to read it, but it was about this African American professor who had a Ph.D. and he was also an ambassador. So I thought, hey, do French and become an ambassador. I had no way of understanding at that time, that a little more went into how I'd become an ambassador. But she said, "Well, while you're on your way to the UN, how about picking up a teaching certificate?" So I thought, that sounds good. So I enrolled in teacher education courses where I met the late Dr. Linda McFadden McNeil. It's what amazes me is that we were in the basement of Sewell Hall. That's where this particular education class was. There were no windows, but her personality lit up the room. It was her first year there. And so, I wanted to show that I appreciated her enthusiasm because most of the people in the class, they didn't seem like they really wanted to be there. But I thought, this woman is so excited. Let me mirror her excitement to her, which really worked to my advantage in that she started to really mentor me. And so I became this French teacher. And when I started teaching French at Bel Air High School, which was our language magnet school, I was fascinated just by the authority I had as a teacher that I didn't know I had. When I walked in the classroom and said, and introduced myself, all the students sat there, and I realized their behavior was really not based on me because I was very insecure going into the classroom, but of all these other teachers who had taught them. So they already knew how to behave. I remembered asking them, I said, we're going to create rules for the class. They came up with all the rules. But as I taught them, I realized I really wasn't through being educated.
Mm.
I envied the fact that they were sitting there absorbing all this knowledge and I was giving it to them, and I thought, "I really wanna go to school some more." So because I loved French, I decided I'd also had a class with a professor named Dr. Bernard Arézu, and he had a class that focused on Francophone literature, and it was one of my favorite classes that I had at Rice University because I was introduced to the Francophone literature, meaning that I would be studying people who spoke French all over the world. So I was introduced to Aimé Césaire, Maryse Condé, um, other Bernard Dadier, French Canadian writers, Marguerite Yourcenar. So I fell in love with an idea of people speaking French in these other places. So I thought I think I want to do Francophone African literature. So, I hadn't really thought I know I didn't have the money to go to grad school, but I did know Rice had a wall near the multicultural student, office where they posted all these grant opportunities. So, I went and looked on the wall and found the CIC Minorities Fellowship, that's what it was called. They gave 25 in the country, and I would be able to if I got it, I would be able to attend one of the Big 10 schools. So in that number, there was Michigan State, there was University of Michigan. I really didn't know the difference, it didn't matter at that at the time. I'm just trying to go to school. So I filled it out and I was like, "Karen, they only give 25 in the country, but if you don't apply, for sure you won't get one." So I applied for a CIC Minorities Fellowship, and when I got it, the University of Michigan's, their deadline had passed. So I applied to Michigan State and it started at Michigan State as a PhD student. And because the goal was to earn a PhD in Francophone African literature. So I started my studies there. And again, I'm looking at people of African descent who are writing in various, French is the predominant language. So I'm looking at folks in French speaking Africa for the most part, but I'm doing all of these foundational studies. So, but I started to feel, the more I became aware of what was happening in the academy at the time, deconstruction was the hot topic. And Jacques Derrida, I'd seen him at Rice. He'd come and talked, and you know, these academic terms were in the air, some of which I kind of understood, but a lot of it seemed like intellectual play, you know. And I thought, I don't know if I want to teach. I knew that I wanted to teach mostly people of African descent because I felt like I felt like the students whom I'd encountered in my neighborhood. I just felt like I was being exposed to certain things that they may not be exposed to. So I wanted to give back to the community in that way. But I started noticing that as I was advancing, I thought, wait, if I'm doing Francophone literature, and even French departments were going through a transition because France was globally was losing its significance in some ways in terms of international influence, right? So English now was the international language. Some things were shifting. French departments also were having to move toward French studies. Um, Latin departments were having to rethink themselves. So I thought, wait, I'm going to be moving more and more away from, I'm thinking, people of African descent. So maybe I need to kind of rethink what I'm doing. Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, so I decided to get my master's degree early. I met some wonderful people and, students from various French-speaking countries. I met them and maintained many of those relationships. But I realized, wait, I think the French is gonna take me to a very narrow audience, and I want a broader audience. Now, looking back, I realized there was a broader audience, but it was gonna take time through
Mhm.
that lens to get to it. So, fast forward, I decide I'm gonna get my master's degree early in French, and I'm gonna go back home and rethink some things. So, while I was at Michigan State, though, this is another very important part of this. I became aware of myself not as a Black woman, but as a Black Southern woman. Okay. So sitting in the classes, I would hear people make blanket statements about Black Southerners that I knew were not rooted in reality. They were I started to go, "Wait a second, huh?" Um, so I became aware of myself as a Black Southern woman, and I also became aware of the fact that, there are racial geographies out there, you know? So I kind of walked into another space. Coming from Houston, Texas, I walked into another space in East Lansing. I was aware of this kind of, um, shift in identity as I had traveled internationally, by that time. I had traveled to France, I traveled to Spain, to various Western European countries, but I thought whatever Black I was in the United States was the same everywhere in the United States. So that identity encounter was more shocking and actually more difficult to adjust to and understand than being a Black woman in France or a Black woman in England. I went, "Wait, I thought I had this covered." So while I was there, one of my French roommate, she was of Armenian descent, and she was Parisian, and she was interested in African American literature, so she asked me to take a literature class with her. And I said, "Girl, I am Black 24 hours a day. I do not need a class." She said, "Karen, please take the class with me." So I did. I took the class with her, and it was pivotal. The instructor was a nun, Dr. Linda Bearden. She was a nun, so class honestly felt like devotional to me. I was raised a church girl, so I'm sitting in class and it's feeling also like devotion because not so much because of what she said. It was what we read. We were reading all of these Black voices, and as I read them, I felt these voids being filled that I did not know I had. So I literally had to start bringing Kleenex tissues to class because her lectures and her voice, all of that together in the habit, I just was feeling nourished the entire time. So I came to the conclusion as a result of her class that if you were an African American, and if you happened to be an African American who was also Christian, you needed two books, the Bible, and you needed all of Black literature. Like you needed to read those two in tandem. Okay. And throw in maybe Shakespeare, all of his plays. You those that would get you through life, okay? So, my mind started to shift, as I said, because I'm realizing French is probably taking me to a very specialized kind of audience, and I really wanna be able to share with people of African descent, and then I'm discovering more about myself. So, as I'm there as a Black Southern girl in this space, you know, and also understanding that, I remember speaking to some people while I was on campus and telling them that I'd gone to a certain place, and, they said, "Oh, we don't go on that Black people don't go on that street." And I went, "Really?" So, it made me aware of the impact too of the migrant who comes from another place and doesn't know the
Yeah.
territorial markings that the locals do, and I went, "Oh, wow, okay, so there are race problems here too?" I thought I went up north. I'm like, in my mind, I'm up north, so there's none of that here.
Michigan still has sundown towns today.
Well, I discover all this later. Because I didn't even at that time, I didn't even know what a sundown town was. But, I was there, and so I thought, now I'm, like, questing to understand Black life and literature, African American in particular. Because remember, I'm reading the Africans and the Black people in the Caribbean. I'm reading their literature, but I had not spent enough time with African American literature and history from scholars,
Mhm.
beyond the Black history moments. So I'm reading, and so I'm like, "Okay, let's read Malcolm X, and let's read his autobiography." And I'm reading, and I'm going, "What? He was in Lansing?" So now I'm just going, "Wait a second." And at the same time, though, I'm like, "Well, but still, even while he was in this space and while race was still there, he was still able to become Malcolm. I mean, he was Malcolm Little, who was still able to become Malcolm X, you know?
Mhm.
Like, so then I'm saying, "All right, wait, I need to figure out some stuff. I need to really read some more." And honestly, I just have to be honest, I started running while I was in the department, I started noticing some things, and this kind of help help me make the decision to go to another space. I I didn't wanna believe that what I was running into was racism. I didn't. So I thought, well, to keep my graduate degree my to make sure my average stays up, I should just finish early. And they'll say, "Oh, well, she was taking more classes. That's why she got a C in this particular class." I was trying to figure out a structured way to to counterbalance what I thought were grades that really didn't represent me, you know? And, so I chose to finish early, and one of the professors in the department said, "Are you leaving because of racism?" I never said anything to them about racism, but she asked me if I was leaving because of racism. And I said, "Well, I'd like to think I'm having personality conflicts with some of my professors." She said, "No, kid, it's racism." And I went, "Okay." So I forgot to mention this part. So while I'm teaching French, people are presuming that I'm from, maybe some French speaking
Yeah.
like place in the world. And when they found out I was from Texas, what? Like, y'all don't even speak English down there, you know? So that was a surprise to some of my students. And what was also a surprise, the people who were coming from France, including one of the professors they had invited to come, what a couple of them told me this. They said, "Your French is the best in the department." Okay. And I'm going, "Oh, whoa." But, I hear really well, so when I speak French, people tell me that I quote, I don't have an accent," you know? And so, um, I I I started realizing, wait, I think I need to just kind of rethink some things. So I was nostalgic and decided to start writing about the little church mothers who would give me money, took $5 in my hand to tide me over until the next Sunday because I was a college student who was also playing the piano for the church on Sundays. I stayed home. I was in Houston, and I ended up with about 50 pages of manuscript. And I sent those 50 pages to my mentor, Dr. Linda McFadden McNeil. She was now the director for the Center of Education at Rice University. She read it and she said, "Karen, would you mind if I sent a copy of this to Dr. John Bowles?" He was the hobby professor of history. I said, "Sure." And then he reached out to me and said, "You should work on a PhD in history." And I said, "I'm not a historian. I'm a French teacher." He said, "Well, based on what you've written, I'm sure you can do it." He said, "Because we don't" at the time, I was working on, my tradition, a faith tradition. I was an African American Pentecostal, student, and I was writing about this tradition, and he said at the time, no one had written anything on Afro-Pentecostalism. There was only one book that had been published, academic book, and it was by an author named Vincent Sinott. So he said, "A Harvard scholar couldn't do a better job than you because you're an insider." He was trying to help me. He said, "Even though, you're maybe feeling that you might not be able to do it, you're an insider." He said, "The only problem with being an insider, though, is that it may be difficult for you to create the kind of distance you need to analyze it. But I think you'd be a great candidate." So I'm thinking, no, I still, in the back of my mind, I don't know about that history thing because history for me was names and dates. It was the experience I had in high school. And I thought, "No, I don't wanna be one of those." In addition to that, as a kid, I remembered saying because I'd hear my teachers complaining about their pay, "Oh, I'll never teach, and if I do teach, I'll never teach history." So I always saw, while I was teaching the whole time, I still kept seeing that as, like, the springboard for whatever wonderful thing I would do with my
Mhm.
life. I'm teaching to pay the bills, but, I'm gonna go on and do something really fabulous. Um, so there's this manuscript here. I'm a secondary educator, and as a secondary educator, I'm introducing my Black students, mostly Black and brown students, to writers that I know they probably have not been introduced to. So I went home with this idea that I'm gonna teach them they're gonna know about all these names, and we're gonna read all these works, and I was really proud that I established the first advanced placement English course at that high school, and by the time the kids graduated, I had some of them for 4 years straight. They had read 33 major works, most of them really by Black writers.
Wow.
I had these high school kids, guess what? We read Afrocentricity, okay?
Wow.
So, I didn't realize that I was kind of without formal training, I was doing Black studies
Mhm.
really as an English teacher. I was introducing them to local writers, one named, Anita Bunkley. I watched this woman publish her first novel out of her garage. Like, her husband bought her the printing press kinds of stuff to do her first novel. It's called Emily the Yellow Rose, and it's about this Black woman that they credit with distracting Santa Anna, which led to the Alamo, the battle at the Alamo, and Texas becoming a republic. Okay, so and I remember her saying she's an African American woman. At that time, while I'm teaching English, she said, there's a lot of fascinating African American history in Texas that nobody's really doing anything with. So she was writing historical fiction. So, now I'm starting to say, huh, you can do something else with history. Because I'm still an English teacher and I'm seeing this person mining historical data to write her historical fiction about Emily the Yellow Rose. So I'm making note of that. And I'm still thinking about Dr. Bowles telling me I should do this history PhD. And I'm still wanting to write this history of Afro Pentecostals. So it's kind of all mixing in together until I tell the kids, okay, we're all going to college. Y'all are gonna be applying for scholarships. I made it a requirement. You're gonna be applying for scholarships, and I'm gonna be applying for money to go to grad school. And I applied to Rice University and was accepted. Many of them were accepted into their schools of choice. And so we all went to college, right? This was in 1994 that I entered Rice. And it was there that as I'm looking for a theoretical framework, again, Black studies comes to the rescue because Dr. Bowles was centered in Southern history, right? And I just started to notice as I read that there was white Black history and there was Black history. And then there was, I started noticing these different voices. And it was also that whole conversation was also elevated in African studies. And I remember Dr. Atieno Odiambo telling me when I enrolled in one of his classes, he said, listen, you're not African. Don't get it. You're not African. You're African American. He said, if you want to do African history, you need to do African history for African history's sake. So then I started learning about the um, different voices that were telling the history of these various African spaces. And that idea had been introduced to me while I was at Michigan State. I saw this woman across the way who just looked regal, and it turned out that she was an African princess. And, I was just fascinated with the amount of money her father could send her through wire transfer, you know? My first time being around somebody who was that wealthy. But I remembered her saying, "Karen," we went to the library together, and she was going through the books, and I just won't mention the country, because they're still living. But she was going through the books and looking at what was said about her family and what was said about her country, and she said, "This isn't true." And I'm like, she's flipping through the book. "No, my uncle didn't do that." And, it was just so I'm like, "Whoa, they're on the shelves." And it was a significant section, right? And so then I became aware of how even at the academic level, when you're reading a book, it depends on who's writing the book,
Yeah.
and the purpose. So I'm looking for a theoretical framework to look at African American Pentecostals in Texas. So the first lifeline that I bumped into at that time was Carol Boyce Davies and her theory of migratory subjectivities. Because none of what I was reading was allowing me to say anything dignified about the people that I was studying. Everything was, about their emotionalism or, they were Southern transplants who were trying to find their way. They were people in migration. They were not people at home. They were people in migration, and they were people who were often perceived as being bereft of of so many things. And I thought, wait, that's not quite working. So some of the sociological frameworks that have been written by African American scholars who were not in the South didn't really help, you know. So Carol Boyce Davies' idea of migratory subjectivities, where you become the center, wherever you are as the center, just made it really easy for me to at least start talking about them. Also, Farah Jasmine Griffin's work on the African American migration novel. I actually bumped into her at a conference called the Collegium on African American Research. That year, we were in Tenerife, Spain, and her book had just come out on the African American migration novel. Okay, so I'm realizing this because I'm thinking about Afro Pentecostals not only as migrating physically, maybe from one place to the next and say into Houston, but I'm also looking at them as people who are migrating out of faith traditions into this new and exciting tradition for them. Okay, at the turn of the century and seeing that movement migrate, that nucleus of the movement migrating out of Houston to California, where the big revival happens, right? So motion is a part of it, which is why I call it the title of the dissertation is the move is on African American Pentecostals charismatics in the Southwest. So I'm learning how to put together a theoretical framework. And I'm also learning, as I'm kind of emerging, like a little chick out of a shell. Black women historians are starting to do fascinating things, right? And I start hearing this name, Darlene Clark Hine. And now now we're past the Ph.D. I now have a tenure track position at Texas Southern University, where Dr. Merlene Petrie, a historian, is dean, and she's also one of the founding members of the Association of Black Women Historians. And she's already done some work, but now her book is just coming out. It's about to come out on Lulu B. White. And so as I'm starting to meet these Black women, uh, or hear them speak from podiums and I'm admiring them like Nell Painter and others, I'm like, "Oh, wow, I need to try to do some Black woman stuff." Because, I'm trying to figure out these Pentecostals, Black men and women and children. I'm not thinking in, gendered ways about it. I'm just trying to understand the movement. But I'm like, "I probably need to get in on some of this action." So I start looking for a topic. And this is when I run into Lillian Jones Horace. So remember, I have the Pentecostal project that's going. And I run into a snag with that. I'd done a lot of work, and this work was taking me to archives throughout the country, really, as I'm trying to put this story together. But I ran into a source problem when it came to my talking about Afro-Pentecostal women. Because by then, there's no way I can publish a book on African American Pentecostals and not give significant attention to the women in the denomination. But a lot of the files at that time, not so much was not digitized, and the files were a lot of that knowledge was the personal knowledge of, or in the personal collections of people who were not necessarily in the academy in all cases, who had begun to collect this information. And they were not always willing to allow, fledgling researchers to come in and, and look at their stuff, right? So because of that, I thought, wait, okay, I'm gonna have to slow down a little bit on the Afro Pentecostal thing. It's in the back of my mind. It's gonna stay there, but I'm gonna try to start working on Lillian Jones Horace. So while I was at Oberlin College as a visiting instructor for a year, I did foundational research on her. And um, how did I come to know about her papers? Because I've been going to these counties to look at Afro Pentecostal property holdings. I had started the habit of going to the libraries in these new counties that I was visiting and asking, in the city and county library if they had anything by a Black woman. So when I went to the Fort Worth Public Library, that was my bingo moment. The archivist on hand, Tom Kellum, this smile came on his face when I asked him, and I went to get some water, came back. He had 12 boxes on the table. He said, "Have you heard of Lillian Horace?" Lillian Horace? I said, "Lillian who?" He said, "Lillian Horace, she was a local teacher," and I'm thinking, "She's gotten this much?" So by this time, as I'm looking at these 12 boxes, I've already heard, Darlene Clark Hine and others talk about given that story excuse me, about the organization that had invited her in. They'd already collected all this data, and, I think it was like the jumpstart for the encyclopedia of Black women's history that she and Nell Painter and some other, phenomenal Black women historians had gotten together to actually even fund, a part of the production of. And I heard all that story, so I'm like, "Wait, let me get Lillian Horace, let me get some more on her." So I at least knew that data on Black women was not easy to come by for history projects, so I knew it was a gold mine. The other problem, though, that's great, but the part of the problem, though, is that nobody knew about this woman. One of my friends who was born in Fort Worth and who went to Rice University with me, she's like, "Karen, I've never heard of her." I said, "I didn't either, but hey, she got 12 boxes, so." So as I started working on her at Oberlin College, Tom said, "Karen, by the way, did I tell you she wrote a novel?" I was like, "What? A novel?" So he sent me a copy of it, and I'm reading it and going, "What?" So I then presumed that I was the first person to write on Lillian Jones Horace until I reached out to Harvard, to the African American National Biography. I'd written this wonderful essay on her, and I'm claiming to be the first scholar, and they said, "Nope, you're not." They said, "No, Carol Kessler, who was an English professor, had she had an excerpt of Lillian Horace's historic first novel in the second edition of a book that she edited called, Daring to Dream." So the first iteration of the book that she published in the '80s didn't have Horace in it. The second, the 1995 or so version, it was in the '90s, that one did. But this was the problem. When Carol Kessler talked about Lillian Horace, she knew her as Lillian Jones. And in the little commentary she wrote, "All we know about Lillian Jones is what appears in the Fort Worth telephone directory." So that's where her research stopped. Remember, her goal was to look at utopian fiction. And so once she had her example of utopian fiction and this description of Horace as not of Horace, but of Jones, like this is all we know about her. She didn't try to dig deep.
Mhm.
That was not her main goal. So the people at Harvard helped me to see that Lillian Jones and Lillian Horace were the same person.
Mhm.
So most of her stuff in Fort Worth was under Lillian Horace. Now, it's important to point this out. The only reason the Fort Worth Public Library had her papers was because the owners of her papers, the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society, their building was leaking. So while their building was leaking, they asked the Fort Worth Public Library to hold her papers and perhaps others to keep them from being damaged while they worked to have their building reconstructed. So I did not know that the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society existed because they weren't listed in the book of repositories. Like you had to pay to be in this book.
Mhm.
And so that introduced me to this idea of historical memory, archivy, and all of that, and how that plays a role in what we get to know about people. Also, a very significant work that I read at some point when I was doing all of this and learning about all this, Michelle Rolfe Trillo, his book, Silencing the Past. I heard him speak at A Power in the Production of History is the subtitle. Silencing the Past, Power in the Production of History. And he was talking about the French Revolution and Haiti, the Haitian history and all
Mhm.
of that. And how power plays a role at all those levels, archivy of the establishment of archives, which is requires money, the interpretation of archives, the writing of history, and the eventual making of history. So it's like as I'm reading this book, I'm walking through these firsthand examples of everything he's describing. The archival issue of the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society, their papers not being listed in one of the secure guides that the historians would know to go to. The interpretation of history, my even having the intellectual space to do it, because now I'm a full-time professor. So when do I get to go and look? And then there are other parts of her history that are not in her files. So I'm reaching out to she had started warming up to biography. So I started looking at all the spaces that she had traveled to: Columbia University, University of Chicago, University of Colorado at Boulder. I'm seeing cha-ching, cha-ching, all these all the money I'm gonna need to go to these spaces. So I'm now thinking, okay, I need to seek funds to do it. So I'm aware of how funding impacts the interpretive phase, and funding impacts the writing phase, and funding impacts whether or not the scholarship gets to see the light of day. And I'm like, "Whoa, we're talking about people of African descent who have historically who've dealt with financial oppression." And I'm at also a historically Black college. I would love to say a hyper-funded historically Black college, but an underfunded historically Black college with a large teaching load. But what's helping me, though, is that I'm at home. My mom and dad are down the street. My sisters and brother, I have a support system, so I can do what I need to do. I can figure things out, and I can learn how to be productive in this difficult space. And when I say difficult, I'm talking about in some places that I've gone to, maybe the scholar walks in with a certain budget that they can command. Like you walk in with a $5,000 budget for books, and then you walk in with a travel budget. Well, that's not necessarily the case. That was not the case. Excuse me. There were funds that I could apply for, you know, but again, that's another step.
Yeah.
Let's ask and let's wait for somebody to decide, right? So I'm navigating all of this, and I'm watching, but it also the other part what's also happening is that as I'm reading Lillian Horace's story, she actually had to publish. She had to establish a publishing company to publish her own writing.
Mm.
Okay, so here I have two Southern Black women. I'm looking at Lillian Jones Horace and Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Hurston out of Florida, Lillian Horace in Texas. So I started looking at those two women, right? And both of their lives are making me think in a Black studies kind of way because Lillian Horace was not only an English teacher, she was a member of Zeta Phi Beta. She was a church woman. She got her journalism certificate. She established a journalism department at the high school. She established the dramatic arts in Fort Worth. So she's not it's easily contained in this spot. So I'm having to in the first book that I published on her, it's an edited collection that includes her historic first novel, but I reached out to an interdisciplinary cadre of scholars to excavate her life. So that because I came into history from literature and language, I already knew there were professors out there who would know how to handle her voice as a literary person. So I was comfortable in that interdisciplinary space. So when I think about it, that first publication really is a kind of Black studies
Mm.
uh, product in
Yeah.
that it is interdisciplinary in scope. So I'm also realizing that she's not just a Black woman writer, she's also a Black church woman. So now, as I investigate her life, now she's helping me to actually see a contrast to my Pentecostals. I'm looking at the organizational structure. So there was one of the books that she wrote is the biography of Lacy Kirk Williams, who was an early Baptist leader. He migrated from Mississippi to Texas to Chicago, and in Chicago, he became pastor of Olivet Baptist Church, which at the time was the largest Baptist church in the country. So she's right. While she was writing his biography, he died in a plane crash. So there was a struggle over the publishing board in the National Baptist Convention that meant that her book did not get published by the convention, but it's written. So right the year before she dies, Lacey Kirk Williams, excuse me, not Lacey Kirk Williams, L. Vinshill Booth, who is a young man establishing the Progressive National Baptist Convention, reaches out to her and asks her if he could publish her book. So he published it, presented it at the 1964 convention of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, of which Dr. Martin Luther King is a member. So remember, there's this split that's happening because these young Baptist brothers are saying, "Wait, we need a civil rights movement," and the older guard is saying, "We want progress, but no protest." Okay, so she's right there at that fissure. So she died the year after they released her book in 1964. She wrote the book in 1941.
Wow.
So I'm reading her life, and here I am, this Black woman trying to get a book published on Pentecostals, and I'm trying to get a book published on her. So her second novel, I tried to publish with University Presses. I could not get anybody to take it. Texas A&M, and this is where, again, when you're coming in, your first generation college professor. So when I submitted the proposal to Texas A&M to publish both of her novels, they said, "We can definitely do one, but we would consider a subvention if you want the second one to be added." Well, I didn't even have time to look that word up. But what they basically what they meant is if you add some money to the pot, maybe we'll publish both. But I think in the long run, it's good that I didn't publish both at the same time because it gave me that space to understand the struggle, right, that Black women may still face when what they are doing is not considered important.
Yeah.
Okay? So what I ended up doing was s what they call vanity publishing, her second novel. But I'm a scholar at that point, so I made sure I had a scholar, Dr. Michelle Benson, write the preface. I knew what I was doing at that point, so I wrote a pretty good introduction, and I wanted it to be something that people could use in a classroom, so there are questions at the end, and that was actually the second publishing I did. The first I did with Xanadu, which does, like, course packets. I did it first as a course packet, and then I did it with, Outskirts Press. So, now I have this book that's been published, and it's out there, and I decided, because again, I'm learning, I decided to submit it for an Indie Award, and it actually won an Indie Award from
Okay.
Next Generation's Indie Award, which has introduced me to a much broader audience, right?
Mhm.
So I'm learning from Lillian Horace, like, she started a publishing company. I can certainly send the manuscript to an independent publisher and publish it. So I'm,
Yeah.
like, drawing strength from her life, and I'm like, "Wait, she didn't even get to publish her own book in her lifetime. It's already written, all I have to do is
Mhm.
publish it and historicize it." So all of this is coming together, and I'm also now meeting her family members. One of my colleagues asked me, if she had any family. She didn't have any biological children, and the daughter she adopted died, um, before I could communicate with her. So, now I'm just trying to make sure people appreciate her experience, and I realize, also that we all have to figure out a way to work from our own place of strength. One thing that traveling to Michigan helped me to realize was that despite my presuming that I was wonderfully independent and a big girl, I appreciated being around my family. You know, I was in my 30s by the time I finished my PhD. And I thought, no, I don't want to have to rebuild all of that. And Houston, although some people may consider a Southwestern or Southern, Houston is the fourth largest city in the country.
Yeah.
Right. And we have two airports. I can fly anywhere in the world, right? So, and we have 5 institutions within, say, a 5 to 10-mile radius of each other: Rice University, Texas Southern University, University of Houston, University of St. Thomas, and the Houston Houston City College. They've changed their name, Houston City College System. Right? And then because we have the medical center here, University of Texas, its presence is here. You know, other
Mhm.
Texas institutions, Prairie View A&M, just down the street. So there's a rich opportunity for intellectual engagement here in the state. And I thought, well, I can fly everywhere where else, and I can stay home, right? Example, yeah, Houston is attractive to a lot of organizations. In fact, the National Council of Black Studies, right? They've
Mhm.
had a meeting here. Um, so w where Black studies needs to go, I think that's a good question. First of all, I think we have to stay abreast of how some of the national changes are impacting the academy,
Yeah.
okay? So, number 1, and this is a fresh issue on my mind, we really need to, even while we wanna study Black, we have to think about what's gonna happen with the intellectual products that we create. This is huge. Intellectual property, because of the corporatization of many academic spaces, we can no longer just talk to our students about the subject matter or the research area. They need to understand how university governance
Yeah.
and legal infrastructure impacts their work. Okay. So in many institutions, it's presumed that what a scholar produces, he or she has the copyrights to. But you need to also but that is changing. My university, for example, has just in April, it updated its intellectual property policies, okay? And so faculty members need graduate students. In some schools, they say that everything that you do while you're here belongs to you if you're the creator. But that is changing.
Mhm.
Okay. So remember all those instances I talked to you about funding. Now, some universities are saying, if you got a grant from us
Yeah.
to do your project, we may be able to lay claim to the copyrights. Okay. So if because they're starting to look at at scholarly productivity as a pathway to financial resources, okay, this kind of thing we're used to seeing in high tech spaces, but right now, it's starting to enter um, this whole area of academic freedom. Uh, So I think it's like we all have to be ready to look at the business side uh, of what we do. It has been what I can say that over my 32 years of being able to explore um, whatever I've wanted to really that falls within the purview of African American history and African American studies, I realize now just how blessed I was to be able to follow the thoughts that came to my mind, the
Mhm.
questions that emerged as I went to conferences and say, oh, that's something worthy of study. As an employee of my university, though, now I'm having to think, okay, when am I working on this project? Is it on, quote, university time? Is it on university money? I mean, I don't want to have to think about those things, but this is our new reality. And this is why Black Studies needs to really think about it. People of African descent have had to deal with different kinds of exploitation throughout our history. We've had to deal with it through enslavement, colonization, post slavery, post colonization. We've had to deal with it. We've gone, and African Americans, many of us in our history, we've gone from being labeled as property, treated like property without a voice, to owning property. And now we're having, as scholars, where we're enjoying academic freedom, we're having to think about our academic products. Like who's gonna own those? And you thinking, so we're borderline in some cases dealing with something that all almost looks like intellectual, if not intellectual slavery, intellectual sharecropping.
Mm.
Because think about it, if you're being underpaid and you're relying on, your if your salary can't pay for you to produce whatever it is you're working on, and you get a grant from your university, and your university can say, "Oh, well, we own that because we paid you, and you did it within the purview of your job here." Like that's it's starting to sound like um, exploitation.
Yeah.
So we have to. w- So while we're creating and while we're thinking about who we are and exploring all the archives and from our sociology, all those different fields, if we're talking about scholarly production, we have to be willing to look at the legal side of that. And before you sign that contract to decide whom you're going to work with, you need to think about what the intellectual property policy in that space is. Okay, we're going to have to say that to our graduate students.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're in a new space, and we need to understand the legal side of that. So, you were thinking about going to law school?
Yeah, I got enough loans. I can't I don't think a law degree is gonna happen at this point.
I'm saying the National Council of Black Studies may need some lawyers on hand. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If they don't have I don't know if they do, but if they don't have a legal team, or a legal organization to help, you know, I'm a member of American Association of University Professors, where they can help with some of the advocacy work, but we can't leave that piece out anymore, is what I'm saying.
Well, thank you. That is a very important note um, to end on. But I think that so much of what you said is so rich in thinking about the process. Like, I really enjoyed hearing about the process and the ways in which Black studies was able to provide that framework and allow you to fully explore the
Yeah.
things that you were interested in um, throughout your academic trajectory.
Throughout my Yeah, Black studies has always been there,
Yeah.
like, I mean, it's just always been there, and it's kind of like the space where I can go to think about it all from all these perspectives, right? That's where it helps, because sometimes if we're just in our discipline, we start just doing it like the historians do. It's like, "Yeah, but I kinda wanna think like a literary person." Okay? So it allows for people like Sadia Hartman to do what she does, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need Black studies to give us this kind of open, malleable space that we don't have sometimes when we're dealing. In fact, let me just say this, because I know you gotta go, but this is really good. I remember when I was writing on Horace, somebody kept telling me, "Well, you're having trouble because she's in literature and you're a historian." I'm like, "Yeah, but there's a historical side to her literature." It's her book is a history product. It's a product of her historical understanding. It's not just a creative work. She's writing it out of a historical context. So, I've gotten this pushback, but I just kept pushing because I know better, you know? Like one day you'll understand. You'll understand better by and by. She's history. So, and also looking at this other side, we can talk about this too at some point with Zora Neale Hurston. I started to realize with Zora Neale Hurston, so much of what happened with her was about this scaffolding that happened over time.
Mhm.
So that when you come and introduce a new scholar, they're like, "Who is she? And who are you to tell us about this woman?" Right? And so I just kept pushing because I learned from Coca-Cola. Hey, if you keep making it, everybody will be using calling your name. So honestly, I did look at business people for that thought, that if you stick with something long enough, don't give up
Mhm.
on it because people say it doesn't matter. Okay? Or don't give up on it. If you really believe in it, you keep doing it. You keep finding ways to do it and don't give up on doing it. So now after 23 years, I have these two documentaries. The fact that they even wanna sit down to talk to me about who gets what happens with the possible proceeds. I wasn't even approaching it that way. In fact, I was surprised when this organization sent, me some forms asking me for the kind of information, they asked for. I'm like, "Oh, royalties. I hadn't even thought about that." I hadn't even thought about that. I just was thinking of the dissemination aspect. Well,
Mhm.
more people can watch it. It's a formal platform. I'm thinking more like that because as I tell people, I have lived a nonprofit life as a church girl and teacher. So, so I'm generally not thinking about the
Mm.
money that I've got to make with something. But eh, but I was able to see how power again and position. And I told my students, I said, "I'm Karen Kossie-Chernyshev at Texas Southern. I'm not Alice Walker, Pulitzer Prize winner at Yale,
Yeah.
telling everybody about Zora Hurst. I said, I have to work with the identity and professional markers I have. And I know it's gonna be an uphill battle, but I believe in what this woman has done. I believe in her story and not only just the products that she left, but her insistence as a Black Texas woman to stay in Texas. She migrated somewhat when her husband was a minister, but she stayed where she felt she could grow, and for her lifetime, she did. But I can see where the forces, the impact of race, space, and, um, uh, may have delayed our our full appreciation of her works, so that I'm still convincing people who are in English on my campus you need to study Lillian Jones Horace.
Well, thank
She's
you.
from Texas. You're from Texas. You're teaching in
Yes.
Texas.
And the
You
importance of regional histories, particularly regional Black histories, cannot be overstated.
Yeah,
I think when you're talking about Texas, like, there's so much there.
there
So,
there is. Well, I hope I didn't go down too many bunny trails. I
no, I so enjoyed it, and I appreciate your generosity
yeah,
in speaking with me today, and I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners will learn a lot from it as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
you're welcome. I have more to share if you ever want to talk again.
Oh, absolutely.
Look,
Absolutely. We gonna
I've
do a
been
part
down
2.
here in Texas, away from all you folks in the Midwest and Northeast, and so I love having y'all stop by.
Yeah, and we gotta talk, we'll do a part 2 because we also have to talk about
Good.
Michigan State. 'Cause
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
born and raised in Lansing. So,
Okay.
yes.
Wow. Well, that's when I learned I was a Black Southern girl. I came to so I started claiming my identity. Yeah, I'm Southern. Oh, wow. Well, anyway, this has been a pleasure and a delight. So just, yeah, anytime you wanna continue talking, we'll
Thank
definitely
you
do
so, so much, and I hope
that.
you have a wonderful rest of your day.
I will. This is giving me the oomph I need for my meeting tomorrow about who owns the copyrights to my documentaries. Okay. Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye.